My name is Laura Kelly. My pronouns are they, them, and thank you for joining the AIDS Bereavement and Resiliency Program of Ontario's second webinar in the series called Care for Resiliency. This three-part webinar series is a shortened version of a 3-hour workshop that I deliver to organizations in Ontario to help community members and workers rethink the way they take care of themselves or access care in their communities in a way that is accessible and holistic. So to introduce myself, I have a background in spiritual care, meaning that I provide counseling using ritual, astrology, tarot, and meaning making and myth to help people solidify and mark passages in their lives or make meaning of changes that are happening. I also have a background in mindfulness, and I like to work in embodiment and being present in our bodies wherever I can and wherever is accessible for folks participating. You will see me looking off screen. I have 2 computers sitting side by side right now with my notes to the side and the camera on one side. So as Mahari said, I'm like a Silicon Valley tech mogul right now. So no big deal. So if you see me looking off screen, that's where I'm looking. So I joined the ABRPO 2 years ago as part of work that I was doing to support harm reduction workers as a form of harm reduction. The chronic stressors of this work and having a system and a government that does not value your work enough creates chronic stress, and that creates harm. And so I believe that supporting supporters can be a form of harm reduction to keep people well in the work. So I've been a facilitator with the ABRPO for 2 years as a facilitator, and the work that I am doing with them now is facilitating our 2-day training, which is an interactive and discussion-based training on how to navigate and meet and care for grief in the workplace. We have a flexible model of grief that sort of sheds the idea that grief goes through linear stages, and when you get through those stages, you are over the grief. The multiple loss model says that grief is ongoing and can show up as many, many things. And we also do skill shares around grounding and bracketing and ways to keep you present in the work, but also caring for yourself so that you can show up for your clients in the way that you want to. Okay, so I wanted to start with a recap of last week. One second, I'm screen sharing here. Hopefully this is going to work. Here we go. So last week we talked about resiliency and breaking it down a little bit away from this idea where resiliency often isn't well defined. Of course, we want to build it, we want to have it in our workplaces, and we know that it keeps us well, but we sometimes aren't exactly sure what it is and what the components of it are. So we talked about resiliency as a skill that needs to be developed with practice. It helps us recover or adapt to stressors inside of us and in our environment. And right now, our resiliency is going to help us move through this pandemic, taking care of ourselves, taking care of our clients, and taking care of our communities, so that when we are once we have moved through the crisis of this pandemic, we can adapt to the changes in society. We can recover some of the strain and stress and depletion on ourselves, and we can recover from the burnout of working through and managing and supporting communities in this crisis. So this graphic I used in the first webinar, that the environmental challenges are like us getting sucked down by the waves, this feeling of like we are drowning, and then resiliency through practicing, as we talked about last week, self-regulation and co-regulation. Self-regulation being awareness of our emotions or thoughts, and from that awareness, making a decision on the kinds of care that we can give ourselves or that we need to access from community or from systemic supports. And that acts to manage or balance our emotions and meet us where we're at and give us care. And that is one way to practice the skill of resiliency. And the other way to practice the skill of resiliency that we talked about last week is through co-regulation. So co-regulation is when you are managing intense emotions or thoughts with another person. So one example that or a way of explaining it that I saw Vicki Reynolds do in a workshop that she did at South Riverdale Community Health Center was, you have a coworker or a client who comes into the space and they're very activated, and so out of like 0 to 10 they're at like a 9, and you yourself might be feeling pretty centered, and so you could be coming in at like a 3. And so by talking to the coworker or community member or client, listening to them, validating them, keeping your energy at that 3, you can sort of come to meet each other and pull that person into a state of regulation, pull that person into a state of balancing and managing emotions. That is co-regulation. So right now we are distanced from a lot of our support networks, so we may be co-regulating online, which is absolutely valid. I mean, we co-regulate digitally through text and through phone even before this pandemic, but now, I mean, Zoom, this webinar is one way that we could consider to co-regulate, and I know that a lot of meetings and community care spaces have moved online. So we can co-regulate even if we can't get face-to-face with people. Of course, it may have a bit of a different tone, but we work with what we can get to take care of ourselves in the moment. Okay. So one of the things we talked about with co-regulation is that it takes a lot of trust, obviously, to if we are in a position where we are the one who's feeling really activated and we are relying on friends, families, partners, coworkers to help us regulate and come into balance in our emotions. That takes a lot of trust. And so some of the things we talked about in the last webinar were being explicit with our boundaries. So that might sound like, I've had, you text a friend, I've had a really stressful day. I don't want to talk about the details, but I could use some kind words, or send me, I've seen on Facebook where people have been like, the day is crap, send me dog videos or whatever. And so that's co-regulating in a way that states your boundaries. But we also want to respect the supporters' boundaries. So I took a workshop on suicide intervention for freaks, weirdos, and queers, led by Carly. I can't remember her last name. Her Instagram is Tiny Lantern. And she said, sometimes a no makes a yes more believable, meaning that if somebody texts us, as soon as we get up and we've just opened our eyes and we see like a crisis text from our friend, maybe we need 5 to 10 minutes to wake up and we can't answer that call right away. And so maybe we send a message that says like, I hear you, I am here with you. I literally just opened my eyes. I need 10 minutes and then I will talk to you and we will get through this together. Because that makes it, by voicing your boundaries, it makes the time that you give to that person more dedicated, more presenceful than if you had just called the friend as soon as you woke up and then maybe you're distracted, you haven't even gone to the washroom yet. And so it just makes you more presenceful as well as a supporter to be explicit about your own boundaries as well. So then resiliency is built by practicing the skills of self-regulation and co-regulation all the time, not just when we are really struggling. So that might look like self-regulating through the day, of even if you're not feeling anxious or worked up, and just checking in with yourself. How am I doing? How is my body? Am I holding tension? What are my emotions right now? And just asking yourself where you're at, to practice that self-awareness. And for co-regulation, it might be just checking in, reaching out to check in on a friend, so that they can reciprocally check back in on you. Maybe you don't have anything that you need support around, but just keeping those lines of communication open build our resiliency so that when we do need support and we are really activated or we are having challenging emotions, we already have practices and patterns in place that we can rely on, and we don't have to come up with ways to reach out to our friends when we are really struggling, because it will be way harder when we're not doing well than it will be when we are doing mostly okay. So that's a recap of the last webinar. You can find that on our website, which is abrpo.org. And there's a recording of it online. So for a preview of what's to come today, we're going to talk about how to make self-regulation and co-regulation accessible, because it takes effort and energy to do that. It takes up our resources to do that. So we have to meet ourselves where we're at so that we're caring for ourselves in a way that actually builds resources rather than taxes our resources. So this is important for me, and sort of is the reason why I developed this workshop, because so I live with chronic illness and chronic pain. And so sometimes I would be in a flare for about 6 weeks. And then what used to happen is that I would get a day where I was feeling strong, and I would say, okay, care plan, we're going to get back into, functionality. And I would write out this like 15-point care plan that would be like cooking a meal once a day, taking all my vitamins, walking 3,000 steps a day, reaching out to 2 people a day. And by 2 days of doing that list, I was in worse shape than I was in the flare up, right? So I was not meeting my very gentle energy resources where they were at. And I was actually hurting myself by trying to take care of myself because I wasn't meeting myself where I was at or respecting my energy limitations. Okay, so screen share, pardon me, bear with me here. We're all kind of new on this webinar technology. Here we go. Okay, so to make care accessible, we have to consider things that tax our energy levels. So there are 2 things that can tax our resources, and that means our ability to self-regulate or co-regulate, or an easier way of saying it is our ability to know where we're at and then take care of ourselves based on that. So 2 things that affect those energy levels or those resource levels are marginalizations that we may experience. So if we experience misogyny, racism, transphobia, systemic poverty, chronic illness, navigating the world under those constraints and oppressions puts a load on our ability, or taxes our ability to self-regulate, to use the resources required to assess how we're doing and meet our care needs in a way that is skillful and is going to build resources. That is taxed by those marginalizations. It's also taxed by our current stress load. So if we've had, I'm sure we can all relate to this, we've had a very, very stressful day and we've held it together through the day, and we've been kind to our clients and community members and coworkers, and then we get home and we just can't do it anymore, and we snap at our roommates, our partners, our pets for no reason. And it's not for no reason, but it's not their fault. We're doing it because we just can't hold it together anymore, because our resources have been taxed through the load of stress that we've been under that day. So by knowing where we are at in the moment, it allows us to match care acts to our care needs. And so we then can figure out what acts will help us build resources and resiliency versus what acts might escape our feelings in a moment, which may not build resources but helps us survive. And that is okay. And part of making this accessible is realizing that it is okay to survive in a moment. It is okay to disengage or escape from our feelings in a moment if we need to get through and do that. And we want to be, when we have resources, building resources with the care that we do, building our tolerance for stress with the care that we do. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that later. So let's talk about burnout. Some people call it compassion fatigue. Some people call it heartbreak. The ABRPO calls it heartbreak because when we are invested in our work, when we are invested in the lives and the well-being of clients and communities, and we are doing that under a load of injustice and a system that may not value our work or value the people that we work with, or we're working through crisis, our investment, we become heartbroken because our investment is there, but it's like, you know, trying to move a mountain, trying to push a mountain from the bottom of it, right? And that can break our hearts, and that is absolutely valid. And we want to, I'm going to talk about the ways to understand our level of resources within cycles of burnout, so that we can match our care to our current energy levels based on where we are in burnout. So burnout is a state of chronic exhaustion. It can bring feelings of meaninglessness or hopefulness. It can worsen our chronic health conditions or put us at risk for developing new ones. And it absolutely, ultimately taxes our resources for self-regulation or co-regulation. When we are in a state of burnout, it is harder to practice resource building care. It is easier to practice escaping care that helps us get through those intense moments in the moment, but may not build resources for us in the long term. And that is okay. But we're going to talk today about how to just like gently work in some resource building care acts to maybe accompany some of those in the moment escaping maybe. And I'm saying escaping with no judgment. Like we all have to take the load or the strain of stress off our mind sometimes. And we want to accompany that with some resource building care acts. Okay, so most of the research on burnout divides it into 4 stages. So just for time constraints and accessibility, I've split those into 2. The first stage, so this is technically the first couple stages of burnout where we're doing pretty good. Maybe there's a little bit of stress coming in, but we are able to manage it. Maybe there's some a little bit of anxiety and depression coming in, but it's fluid, meaning that it's not every single moment of every single day, and it might be a couple tough days a week, but mostly we're managing. We're able to take new stuff on because we're feeling strong and centered in ourselves. You know, this is when stress is just starting to show itself. So, you know, we might have some appetite changes or some sleep disturbances, but it's only mild. It's maybe a couple days a week that we're having a sleepless night or we skipped a meal. It's not yet entrenched. So in thriving, we're present in community, and that might be physical communities. That might be online communities. We're engaging with our friends, we're engaging with our families or chosen families. We feel present in community. We might feel spiritually grounded or connected. Sometimes we talk about spirituality doesn't have to be this idea of like higher power or religious centeredness, though it can be, but it also can just be a feeling of meaningfulness and a feeling of connection. So right now, I mean, we are living right now in unprecedented times in this pandemic. So right now, thriving might be feeling motivated when you show up to work. It might look like running extra errands to drop off groceries to your family and friends because you're feeling strong and like you have some extra energy to give. It might look like organizing in online groups or initiating group chats with your friends or Zoom hangouts with your friends. So because there is this energy, this extra energy, this feeling of thriving, we are able to put in that energy. Okay, So surviving is when the stress has taken hold, the burnout has progressed, and these are the latter stages of burnout, where we are just holding on. We are maintaining bare minimum routines. We might be pulling back from community engagement and from our friends so that we can conserve our energy. And often we're conserving our energy so that we can show up and do the work. Though, because we are showing up, we are placing important things to us like community, routines, maybe it's our self-care, as second to the work, but the stress stays the same. And again, we're trying to push that mountain and we just can't get anywhere. These stages of burnout bring with it a feeling of shame that we're not doing enough, we have to do more, or maybe we start thinking we're not effective in our work. Our spirit is low. We start feeling disconnected or feeling hopeless. Any anxiety or depression that was sort of, as I said, fluid before in the thriving stage is now like entrenched. It's systemic, meaning that insomnia is prevalent. The tension of anxiety maybe has become like constant body pains. Appetite is not just changes, but it's maybe a disruption now. So cycles of eating have completely changed. And so, you know, I think many of us can relate to that right now. And so what surviving might look like for us right now is disengaging from community or friends or roommates or partners. Pardon me. Oh, excuse me. Maybe we're distracting and watching TV. That's my go-to when I need to just escape reality for a bit. It's definitely in the fantasy land of TV, and I've been doing that a lot. I'm self-isolating now, and it's been almost 14 days, and so I'm watching a lot of TV, and sometimes it doesn't feel good, but sometimes I just need to turn my brain off. Coping during surviving stages of burnout might look like drinking more than we would like to or more than we want to help us get to sleep or to manage stress. And those are okay ways to cope. There's no judgment on the way we survive. And hopefully this webinar series is going to give us ideas on how to just like scooch a bit of resource building care in there. So one example that I've been doing, as I said, I've been watching a lot of TV, and sometimes that can be a depression trigger for me. Like if I go past like 3 hours, usually I start to really not enjoy it, but sometimes I can't stop and I just like start to just like feel really down, though I keep watching TV. So what I've started doing is texting a friend at like my 2-hour mark and being like, hey, I'm feeling down, I'm feeling disengaged, I'm in a TV hole, and I'm okay with that, but will you check in on me in 1 hour and just be like, hey, what's up, right? So I'm practicing a little bit of resource building care there by making a connection to somebody else. I'm asking somebody else to help me co-regulate, but not right now. Right now, I need to disengage, but in an hour, I'm gonna push myself, if able, to connect with you and to co-regulate together through that. And we're going to talk about what other examples of accessible care can look like in a little bit. So there's no clear timeline or divide between surviving care and thriving care. Sorry, I'm jumping ahead. Through being in a state of thriving or being in a state of surviving. There's no clear line between them. There's no clear timeline. We get to define where we are at in a given moment because we know ourselves best. And so right now with this pandemic, we're in a paradigm shift where the ways that we were thriving before will likely look different when this pandemic is done. And the ways that we have pushed ourselves through survival, we will likely know a deeper resiliency in ourselves through this pandemic than we thought was possible, because even when we are struggling, we are going to survive this and we are going to do it together. So we're going to need to meet ourselves where we're at because there are tough months ahead. And we are going to need to honor our energy levels, meet ourselves where we're at, and give ourselves resource building care when we can, but allow ourselves to take care of ourselves on a survival level when needed. So I wanted to take a break from talking at you and do our first poll. Mahari is going to throw up a poll for us to just think about what I've said, check in on yourself. Where are you right now? Are you surviving right now? Are you thriving right now? Are you somewhere in between? Please feel free to answer the poll if you find that relevant to you, and Mahari is going to throw that up for us in a minute.
Poll is up. Are you able to see it?
Oh, maybe I can't see it because I'm the host. Oh, Mahari, it's allowing me to launch the poll, but it's not working. So, okay, you know what? We'll scrap the poll. That's cool. I'm just moving with the Zoom flow these days. We're all just trying to figure it out together. Okay, so take a moment of reflection for yourself. What did you resonate in that? Are you feeling like you've been surviving lately? Are you feeling like you're thriving? Maybe think too like how that has changed since we've been in pandemic survival mode. Oh, here we go. Yay, the poll is up. So feel free to answer that. Okay, thanks for filling in the poll if you did. So it looks like most folks are in between, and I think that makes a lot of sense because, we're in the early stages of working under new conditions, managing this crisis. And so hopefully for the folks who are in between, what we're going to talk about today can help you buffer a little bit before you get to survival mode. And the participants who answered that they're in survival mode, hopefully what we talk about today or next week can give you some ideas of how to give yourself care that can meet you where you're at in your surviving and maybe build that resiliency even though you're in survival mode. Okay, so let me get back to my notes. Okay, so there are different types of care that can meet ourselves where we're at in survival or thriving. And so I like to call them hard care and soft care. Let me get back to my screen sharing. So I like to call them hard care and soft care, but only you get to define what that means. I'm not the expert in this. You decide what is easy care for you and what is hard care for you. So first, soft care. Soft care makes us feel good in the moment. It's soothing. It's gentle with where we're at. It might look like soaking our feet after a long day or giving ourselves an affirmation, taking a hug from a coworker or a family member, or venting to a coworker or family member. And if you don't resonate with any of those, that's okay. You get to define your own soft care, right? What could be soft care for me might be really tough for you, and what might be really tough for, or what might be easy for you might be tough for me, and that's okay. So you know, one thing that we've heard a lot when we go into sites and organizations is that sometimes upper management may not value taking time for care or working care into workplace culture. And so there are ways that you can do soft care acts like this in a simple way on your break. You know, so one thing that I like to do is when I'm having a nice conversation with a friend or somebody sends me a nice text, I screenshot it so that it's saved to my pictures. So when I'm feeling low, when I'm having a hard time, I can go through that and just like feel like a nice moment of feeling loved by my friends. It might be looking at cute animal videos online, videos that make you smile. It might be taking a walk and listening to music, or asking a friend for some kind words. Those are all things that we can do within like a 15-ish minute time span on our break. So even if our workplace doesn't prioritize us taking care of ourselves, we can take that into our own hands and we can prioritize our own care and we can find time for that on our breaks. So then hard care, it doesn't pay off right away, but it improves our functionality in the long term. And it's a bit harder to do. It pushes us a little bit. So soft care met us where we were at and was gentle. Hard care pushes us a bit. So this might look like cleaning your house. Right now we are sanitizing our groceries and takeout, and it makes me really anxious and it's super hard to do. And it takes a lot of physical effort in me, but it's worth it and I'm doing it. But that for me is the hard care that I'm doing right now. Hard care might look like having a tough conversation with a friend about some boundaries. It might also look like making a health appointment and then going to it. That is something that can pay off in the long run, though it's tough to do. Okay. So hard care and soft care are things that we intuitively guide our clients through doing. And we have to make sure that we are doing it ourselves. So if we are finding ourselves that we are surviving, then maybe we prioritize more soft care right now. Maybe we are soothing ourselves, we're meeting ourselves where we're at, we're going gentle on ourselves. And even if, so in my example of like zoning out to TV, maybe I'm making sure that I have a huge glass of water beside me when I'm doing that. And making sure that I stay hydrated is my soft care, right? Even if I'm doing something that is just helping me escape in the moment, prioritizing my hydration and my care is going to build me a little bit of resource, right? And maybe we are feeling like we're in an in-between state. So we're still engaging in some hard care. And so we can push ourselves to talk to our parents about like, please don't go out and do your own grocery shopping. I can help you with that. Or, you know, talking to our neighbors about if they need help with groceries or stuff. And so doing those little soft cares if we are in a surviving moment, or hard cares if we're in a thriving moment, builds our resiliency. Meeting ourselves where we're at and then giving ourselves care based on that doesn't further tax our already depleted resources. It meets us where we're at, and that builds resources and builds resiliency. So in that way, if we do this with our clients, we are resiliency practitioners, right? We are helping clients build resiliency. And I think that a lot of people in this field are so heart-centered and care so much for the community members and the clients that they work with that it's easy for us to forget about ourselves, right? So the whole point of this workshop is like bringing it back into yourselves. And of course, there's going to be skills that you can give back to community, but this is about keeping ourselves well in the work. So Mahari, can you throw us up another poll? This poll is going to be what care do you use the most? I'll write it in the chat. And the answers are hard, soft, or a mix. So take a sec to think about that, and then we'll answer the poll in a minute.
Can you say the options again, Laura?
Not yet. Oh, yes, I do. No, I
Have
see the,
subtomy.
I see the all results. Okay, same as before. If we can't get that poll going, so just reflect. If you find that you are better at or using more of soft care, maybe consider, if you have the resources, when you have the resources, what hard care acts you could work into that. I personally usually find myself doing more hard care acts, and it's tough for me to be gentle and soft and soothing with myself. So when I'm in survival mode, that means sometimes I can get tough on myself, that I'm not doing enough, whatever. And those are the times when I need to be enacting soft care the most. Okay. Okay, so to wrap, meeting ourselves where we're at matches our current energy and resource level with care acts that hopefully build just a little bit of resource. Doing this, meeting ourselves where we're at and accepting our limitations in a given moment is an act of compassion. By not pushing ourselves and depleting our resources even more, we build resources for regulation. Building resources for regulation makes it easier to regulate and care for ourselves in the future. That builds resiliency, and that can help us either prevent or recover from burnout. And that is not to make it sound too simplistic. Obviously, it's nuanced and dynamic and super tough, but these are some skills that we can make our own. Take out of this what makes sense to you, what you can work into your care routines already that are already established, and hopefully something out of this was relevant today that you can use to help build your resiliency. So we'll take a little bit of time at the end of our session to open up Q&A. If anybody has any questions or thoughts to share, it doesn't have to be a question. And we'll open that up now. And if you're joining by phone and you can't type it in, please feel free to just turn your phone off of mute and ask me that question in your voice. That's great. So while folks are thinking of a question or getting ready to ask it, I'm going to post the resources that I used to create this content. They're up on the screen now. Okay, so if we don't have any questions, and please feel free to put that into the chat or get in touch with the ABRPO in another way if you have some more questions following this content. So let's talk about what's coming up next. Our next webinar is in 2 weeks, and we will be talking about a care model that is holistic, meaning that we divide care into body, emotions, mind, and spirit to make sure that we are caring for ourselves as a whole, not just one part of ourselves. We just in the same way that maybe we practice more soft care or more hard care, we may take care of our body more than our mind or more than our spirit. So for me, that holistic model is based on a Western astrology model that follows the seasons. And for the ABRPO, that is based on a Turtle Island indigenous model that was taught to program creators when they were developing this content. So we'll talk about a holistic model of care, and we'll give examples of what that might look like. So what does body care look like in terms of hard and soft care? What does emotion, mind, spirit care look like in terms of hard care and soft care? So that we can give some concrete examples of things that you can start doing now through this pandemic crisis to keep your resiliency up through the work, through self-isolation, wherever you are, keeping your resources up, because it's not just folks who are working who are struggling to keep their spirits and their resiliency up right now. We are all in this together. And then we're going to end the next webinar with a care plan. So thinking about how we can narrow in on one care act for hard and soft care within our body realm, and then do the same for emotions, mind, and spirit, and making sure we do that in a way that is achievable and accessible for where we are at in the moment. Okay, so we're getting ready to end our time together. And so the last thing I've posted up here is our website, which is abrpo.org. And my email is there too. It's laurjkelly@gmail.com. That's LAURJKELLY. So thank you so much, everybody, for joining us, and thank you so much for your patience through our tech.
There's some comments on the chat.
Oh, is there? Oh, great. Okay, I see one that says, unfortunately, my internet connection was very glitchy, so there were some gaps in the content. Is it possible to have access to a recording of the webinar? Absolutely. We're going to post it online on our website. So again, that's abrpo.org. Give us a little bit of time to get it up and online, but keep your eyes peeled to the website, and we are going to post videos of all of the webinars. So if you missed last week, that will be up there as well. Thanks. Okay, I see a comment from Heidi. They're going to start doing a bi-weekly check-in. And this is a great way to not only practice self-regulation of where am I in a moment and how can I communicate that to my team, but to hear from your team as well, so that everybody knows how everybody is doing, and that you know, if I'm having a hard time, maybe I can ask my coworker to check in on me. And if you hear your coworkers coming into shift really stressed out, maybe you can check back in on them. So check-ins on your team is a great way to practice both self-regulation and co-regulation. Thanks, Abby. Oh, and Mahari says he will post the webinar by Monday. Okay, I think that's it. Mahari, are there any more questions or comments that I'm missing?
That's it.
Okay, that's it. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Please take what you will away from this today and make it your own. Only you get to decide what is hard care or soft care for yourself. Please stay well in the work, and we hope to see you in a couple weeks at our third webinar. Thank you so much.